wishing well.
Oh, I know what to do.
Sure.
I'm gonna keep putting them.
Christian, you're in my
Christian,
way.
your head's right in his way.
Wait a minute, wait. We'll go back.
We're going home, Grandpa. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joey, look at little guys in front.
Okay, folks, now this guy sitting here represents the miner that would have been up there drilling and blasting. When it comes time to send this coal outside, he's going to do so using a 4-ton mine car like the one sitting back here. That's one of many that were left in the mine when it shut down. That is how all the coal got hauled out of here. Now he sits there with his feet down there for a very specific reason. As I said, the guys working down here back then, wearing carbide and oil lamps, they weren't very bright. They gave you nowhere near the amount of light this one right here gives off, and they also didn't have the electric lights running throughout the mine that we have today. We can see pretty well using this one I'm wearing right now. However, working down here with one of those other lamps, that might give you a rough idea, maybe about this much light to see what you're doing. Now, once he opened the battery door and that coal starts to fall down, all that coal dust is going to rise up in the air till it pinched off the last of that light. You would no longer be able to see your hands in front of your face. This leads back to why he sits there like this, folks. Since he can't see it, he needs to feel when the buggy's full. When the coal bounces off his boots, he knows it's time to shut the battery door, stop the coal from flowing. He'll then wait for a bit and let the dust settle down. While he's waiting for that to happen, I'll give you an idea of work conditions down here. You're down this end working, you have that flame burning on your hat. Those guys back there fired off that explosion. That percussion can come through with a strong breeze, blow that flame out, leaving the dark in an instant. Now, should you have an emergency arise at that moment that you have to get out of here in a hurry, keep in mind that wishing well you just walked past, back in the day of operation, did not have a steel cage over it. That was one clear shot that goes 300 feet down to the next level of the mine. Should you trip and fall trying to get out of here safely, hopefully you survived that fall going down there. If you do, make sure when you get back to your feet you don't move too far to the west. Right next to it is another opening, goes 300 feet further down to the very bottom of the mine. That gives you 1,000 feet from the top of the mountain down to the bottom of this mine, so be very careful where you step in here, folks. Once that dust settles down, he's going to call that mule tender back. He comes in and hooks the chain up, starts pulling this buggy outside. Now, they did not want the mules to go in and out of the sunlight several times a day because that would harm their eyes. So to avoid that, if you noticed on the ride in, we actually came up a small hill at one spot. When they get to that point, they're going to disconnect the chain, get the mule behind the buggy, and give it a shove. 4 tons of coal on that little hill will gain enough speed. It goes out the door pretty freely on its own, so you solved that problem, but you also created a new one. There were no brakes in the buggies, but you still had to stop them. Job number 2 for the boys in the mine, they were called a runner. This was their tool of the trade called a sprag. Good piece of hardwood whittled down on the ends. These boys are going to be in the rock tunnel between the hill and the opening. When that buggy comes rumbling towards them, they're going to run alongside, bend down and stick this in the spokes of the wheels. Let it roll around, hit the bottom of the car, and work like a braking system. Now, fine and dandy, but if those boys should trip and fall doing this job, it was fairly easy for their hands to end up on the rails as the cars passed by, so it wasn't uncommon for those boys to be missing several fingers or even a hand at some point. After a bunch of cars are outside, they hook them all together and use the steam train to haul them out to the east end of the mountain where the breakers sat. Out there you had job number 3 for the boys. Those were, of course, the infamous breaker boys. Some of those boys started working out there as early as 6 or 8 years old. They're going to be out there through the dead of winter and the heat of summer, picking rock and slate from the coal chutes that run down throughout the building. They're not wearing gloves to do their job because gloves will slow you down, and if you don't do your job well, you won't keep it. All 3 jobs for the boys, they paid between 80 and 90 cents a day. Now, at the end of the day, all those boys are walking home together in a group. They're completely covered from head to toe in coal dirt, filthy as ever. You really can't recognize one from the other. But as they walk down through the streets, the folks in town always said they could still pick a breaker boy out of the bunch. They call those boys the red tips. Because after spending that long day out there in the breaker, picking rock and slate with their bare hands, usually their hands and fingers were smashed up that much they were still dripping red with blood on the walk home. One last bit of information I'll throw out to you folks. If you are familiar with the town of Centralia, 2 miles north of here, They've had a mine fire burning under that town since 1962. That fire is burning in a vein of coal, which strangely enough is the very same vein you're standing in right now. Oops. Oh. Now the odds of that fire coming down this end and affecting us, folks, very slim and none, because as I said, these veins go down 2,000 feet below the ground before returning back up. By being down so deep, they're very well below the water table. The fire won't pass through all that water. Any questions, folks? Anyone get a two-way ticket? If we have no questions, folks, we'll head back and give you a ride on out.